Hey guys, welcome back. This is part 2 of our build of the Moebius Battlestar Galactica Colonial Viper, the Mark 1 version from the original series. And as you can see, picking up where we left off with the lighting, I've now added in a little bit of styrene plastic right here. It's not very pretty, but it's not going to be seen. And this is just holding in a 3mm white LED, and this will light the front of our cockpit screen right here. And I just had some hot glue, put it in there, threw in another piece of plastic just to kind of support it. It's in there, it's not going anywhere, and I'll run this wiring underneath the cockpit, something like that. And now what I need to do is go in with some of my, I'm going to have two 3mm white LEDs on either side to light the sides of the cockpit instrumentation. And so I have to kind of figure out what's the best location, and I'm simply going to hot glue those in the position right somewhere abouts in there. And plans for lighting, I'm still kicking around with what kind of base I'm going to use or display. I'm not really committed, but if I do go with a landing formation using the landing gear, I have managed to, with my rotary tool, just channel out this landing gear and get wiring through it. And these are some wires from an old phone line. If you have any of that laying around, there's some very small diameter wires. So I just need to get it from inside the power source up into the model. This is the bottom of the ship where this will plug in, so it actually comes out into a nice position where it's going to be close to the engine lighting and where the cockpit lighting, all those wires will connect right in here. So there's a good chance I'll go that route, and just take a look inside of here. I haven't sealed this obviously. But I've just channeled out. The only parts you have to be careful with is right here is a little thin, as you can see, but I managed to channel it out enough on both sides to be able to get those two small diameter wires all the way through, and then cut a hole through the top. Actually, we could probably remove this whole center piece right here because it just simply fits up into this part right here. It's not going to be seen, so if I had to, I could cut that away, but the wires fit through for now, and fit through the base, and we'll be able to glue that all together. So there's a good chance we're going to go into the landing configuration, and if we do, then we have the wires for it all set up. So that's where we're at right now, and I'm just going to work on getting some of these LEDs attached inside the cockpit and make sure they're fitted right. Alright, so this is just a test fit and checking the lighting, and pretty happy with the way it's coming up. It's not glued together right now, it's just held on with that clamp. But overall, all the wires fit in. It took a little finagling to get everything situated and fit together. Whoops, there goes my clamp. One of the issues of trying to get this part together is that you have this piece that goes for the forward landing gear, and it doesn't want to fit in real well between the two, especially with all the wiring and stuff. So it took a little bit of messing around to get that to fit in there, but I'm happy with the way it's turning out. I'm very happy with the way the cockpit is lit up, and now that it's glued into place. So the cockpit's not glued into place, but it'll be held in place once these two parts are glued together, and you can kind of see the hodgepodge of wires coming out the back. So looking good. I'm going to be sealing this up and gluing it, and we'll move forward from there. Alright, so now you can see where we have the ship glued together, and it was a little tricky. You can see the different clamps I used on it. One thing about these clamps is this is one kind that I like to use. I have several different types, but this is adjustable. It's easy to use with one hand while you're trying to hold a model in position, and so I highly recommend these. Plus these particular ones come with a rubbery type grip, so it's a little softer on your plastic, but you can control how much pressure you put on it. Again, when I was putting the Viper together, I kind of held it in place with the different clamps, not too tight enough to where I could take some of this thin cement from Tamiya and then run it in between the seams of the ship and then tighten it up a little bit to where everything was coming together. Now you can see where on the Viper I've added in a coat of primer. Well, before I added in a coat of primer, I had started addressing some of the seams that are showing through, and I used some of this. This first time I used this, I've seen a lot of modelers using this Bondo glazing putty, and it seems to go on pretty smooth and dries really quick. And I think within an hour or two I was able to sand it, and so still got a little bit of work to do right here, you can, the reason I put on thin coat of primer is that it starts to reveal how your seam work's coming. And I still have a little bit of issue on the bottom. Right here, across the top's looking pretty good. It's nice and smooth. I've sanded it a little bit since I've put that coat of primer on. I think we need to do a little bit more of the Bondo right here. That seam's showing, and we just wanted to make it look nice and you know, polished look when we get done. And of course there's going to be a decal that goes all the way across the middle of the ship right here, but we don't want that seam showing through the decal. So I'm going to be applying a little bit of Bondo. Now this says it can be a skin irritant, so I'll be using gloves, and I'll just take a little dab and I'll put it across the seam and give it time to dry, and then come back with some sandpaper. Also, I was rescribing some of these panel lines where the Bondo kind of filled in, and I got a little bit crooked right here, so I'm going to try to go back over that and fill that in with the Bondo and see if I can get a straighter line on that. It's on the bottom of the ship. It's not going to be very noticeable, but that is something I think we can fix without a whole lot of effort. So we'll just get busy with that. Okay, you can see where I've applied the Bondo. Now I'm just going to give it time to dry, and I'll just put over kind of a thin coat, but enough to where it's raised above the surface, so when I sand it down it'll be level with the surface. And what I did on the bottom, and there's a little spot here that was visible, but we're just going to give this time to dry, and then we'll come back and sand it down and then reprime it once we are satisfied that the panel lines are addressed. Okay, so I'm working on the engine housing, just getting it assembled. It comes in three parts. You have the base part and then the two sides of the engine housing. And I want to make sure that they are aligned properly, and it's a little tricky. The way it's fastened together is these little slots kind of slide into the open parts, and it's not the most stable thing, and I want to make sure it's aligned correctly. So as you can see, I've added these rubber bands to kind of hold it in place. And what I intend to do is I'm just going to glue one joint at a time and just pull it apart just enough to where I can get some of this extra thin cement in there, and just address it and make sure that that dries, and then move on to the next joint and do the same thing. That way I can focus to make sure that each joint is aligned properly as it's being glued. And then once I get done with that and glued all the joints together, I plan on going back inside and putting some thicker glue just to kind of make sure that I have a good weld on here into the parts. So that's the plan, and we'll see how that turns out. Alright, so we got it all glued together. Everything looks pretty good, so I'm pleased with how that turned out. We have a little bit of seams here, and just working on sanding those off. Most of it's going to be covered up once you install the wings, so I'm not too worried about that. But again, we added in some extra, or some thicker glue to the inside parts just to make sure we have a good solid weld. So I'm pleased with how that turned out. So here we have the clear insert that goes into our engine nozzles, and what Moebius did is they made a round slot that's the perfect size for a 3mm LED, and it fits in there nicely. And probably just super glue that in there, possibly hot glue it in there, and you'd have a lighting effect. However, the effect, and it doesn't really show well on camera because there's a lot of bleeding, the light's bleeding, but basically the result is you get a very hot spot where the LED is, and not so much around the rest of the nozzle. It's a fairly big nozzle, and you're getting this really small hot spot in the middle of it. And it's just not the greatest effect. I tried doing a couple different things. I tried taking a piece of aluminum foil and kind of wrapping around it, and that helped a little bit, but not a significant difference. But I've watched a few other guys on their resolutions. I know Interstellar Modeler, what they came up with is actually attaching the LED to the inside of the engine housing and centering it up with the nozzle, about half an inch away, and so you get a much broader, see if I can kind of simulate that on the camera for you, and that's held about an inch away, and it tends to light up the whole nozzle and not give you that hot spot right in the center. So that's the direction I think I have to go. I mean, if I wanted to go that way, I could, and we would have a lit engine, but I think with a little bit of work, it's going to look much nicer. And I actually have some ideas on doing something else, which I'll maybe go into later. I'm going to have to see how it works out. But I'm definitely going to have to move it away. And what the other guys did on their videos is they built a small framework, kind of vertical and horizontal, that held the LEDs into place in here. So that's the plan. Alright guys, well that's where I'm going to end part 2. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we're just going forward to build. And until next time, everybody have a good one.